Williams seems not to have been aware that his devotion to his mother Louis might have coloured all his other relationships. He was conscious that his respect for his father Charlie and his love for his half-sister Pat had failed to attain the same height. He had always admired his parents' marriage and wanted to emulate it, but he could not endure the presence of a sexual element in a friendship. All this touching and kissing, which seems so popular among others, passes me by.
I've had some good friendships, but that's about all. I don't think it's given to us all. I remember the recent announcement by the Pope talking about this test tube baby business, and this marvellous sentence where he said, "For some, it is natural they don't have any children, and they'll just have to accept it." And I thought, how wonderfully simple and honest. And that's the truth for hundreds of bachelors, I suppose. They are not meant to share in that way.
Jack, a terrier that he and Pat had bought to keep Louis company, aroused something very immature in him. The Jack Russell, 11 weeks old and not house-trained when he collected it from Harrods, was a favourite at first. Williams enjoyed walks in the park with the dog cavorting in mud and slush. As the animal got bigger, he worried that it was diverting too much of his mother's energy and affection. He became jealous of the dog, and his dislike became intense. Went over to Louis. "I bashed the dog because it misbehaved." The next day, "Louis looked a bit faint. I think it's partly worry and partly the dog, which he has to keep taking out. That dog is a nuisance. I will have to see about getting rid of it." Within 48 hours, Jack had been adopted by friends. When Louis protested that she missed her pet, Williams took her to see it in its new home and insisted that after 1 week the dog no longer recognised her. After another attempt to buy a cottage, he decided he could be happy only in a flat and chose one next to Baker Street Tube Station. The move served its subconscious purpose, for he was chivied out of despondency. Suddenly he was measuring up for carpets and blinds and a wardrobe. Farley Court delighted him. The bliss of being insulated from his neighbour's noise could not be exaggerated. It felt like a state of spiritual grace. And the views were glorious. All down the Marylebone Road and across Regent's Park, the vista of that London to which he really belonged. Work began within days on another Carry-On film, Carry-On Spying. "It's 00, oh!" promised the posters, with Williams in a Sean Connery pose, arms folded and flaunting a pistol. His gun barrel is bent. The film's salvation was Barbara Windsor, a star on television's The Rag Trade, as well as in the West End hit Things Ain't What They Used to Be. When she arrived, Windsor was in awe of him, and on set she mangled her first lines. Williams glared at her from behind his secret agent's black whiskers. "Darling," he sneered, "do please get it right." Windsor, a graduate of stage school and the Joan Littlewood Theatre, could deal with bullies. "Don't you yell at me," she snapped. Williams leered. "Oh," he said, "ain't she wonderful?" Windsor had married her boyfriend of 3 years, Ronnie Knight, the day before filming started. When she told Williams she had postponed her honeymoon, he suggested they could take it in Madeira. If they flew via Lisbon, there was an evening ferry to Funchal. The holiday would be the most romantic experience of her life. It was so idyllic, in fact, that he would come with her. And he'd bring his mother and his sister, too. For all the obvious reasons and more, the holiday was a fiasco. As they flew home, Williams cursed himself for his stupidity, not in booking himself on a friend's honeymoon, but in sharing a hotel with his mother and sister. In future, he resolved, he would holiday alone. There was another attempt at a holiday in Amsterdam, but he worked himself into a state of fright and fled after 2 days. "The story of my life," he admitted, safely home at Farley Court. "The run-up and the run-away." Michael Codron introduced him to Joe Orton. "I warn you," Codron had said, "we'll have to have the friend. They're practically inseparable." Kenneth Halliwell, taller and older than Orton, with sibilant affected speech and a hairpiece, continually interrupted the conversation with small corrections, as though he was the writer's accountant rather than his lover. If Williams had understood their dynamic, He would have grasped Austen's new play Loot as well, but he did not, and it would wreck his career in theatre. Seeing the excitement that comic and playwright sparked in each other, Michael Codron decided to press ahead with Austen's play. Williams signed up for 9 months, and Loot went into rehearsals at the beginning of 1965, with almost daily changes to the script. There was a thrill of media anticipation at the collaboration between radio's favourite anarchist and the latest bad boy of theatre. But all the cast knew the play was in fragments. Friends who came backstage could say nothing to console the cast. Laurence Olivier commiserated. "You haven't got a play here. That's your trouble." Carry On co-star Fenella Fielding remembers seeing the show.
I knew that it was meant to be a comedy, and it wasn't making anybody laugh. And Kenneth was, I don't know, I suppose he was just desperate. He was doing a send-up of something or other, but he was going into many different characters while he was supposedly playing this detective.
After the first night of Loot in Oxford, 2 undergraduates strolled back to their digs discussing Kenneth Williams's disjointed performance, and they wrote him a letter. "Dear Mr. Williams, there are amongst Oxford's dreaming spires 2 quite undreamed of young men who have charm, elegance, poise, and, how shall I say, a sort of quiet beauty. Perhaps you would care to come round for a conciliatory cup of coffee to the above address." At 11 a.m. on Friday the 19th of February 1965, when Williams walked up to the first-floor apartment, he was hiding his nervousness behind his carry-on persona. "Yes, hello." "It was all that," Tom Wayne said. Williams took Tom and David to lunch at his hotel, the Mitre, where most of the talk centred on trends in acting. A correspondence now began between Tom and Kenneth Williams, which for Williams was the most propitious way of developing a friendship. By the 3rd of April, his letters were full of the surreal innuendo he reserved for trusted friends. The friendship became less alarming to him when Tom Wayne revealed he had a steady boyfriend, a young postman named Clive Dennis. Almost half a century later, they're still together, living in an elegant house, furnished with paintings and ornaments that are mementos. Throughout their friendship, a platonic relationship that nevertheless was the closest that Williams ever approached to a steady love affair, Tom Wayne kept all his handwritten notes and letters in careful order, almost 200 of them. Tom and Clive have never spoken openly about their friendship with Williams before, nor have their letters been made public until now. Williams wrote to Tom Wayne to tell him that John Schlesinger was throwing one of his notorious parties. "I could always take you along if you liked." In another flash of confidence, he added his latest telephone number. Williams changed it regularly because he hated to be phoned when he didn't feel like talking, especially when the call concerned work. Williams had discovered the ideal consorts. The young men were welcome guests. They reflected youth and glory upon him. They were light-hearted, and, since they were a couple, he could slot into his favourite role as the third wheel, the centre of all types of attention, except sexual. For 8 years, Tom Wayne and Clive Dennis were Williams's closest companions, so much a part of him that he introduced them to most of his other friends, an unprecedented confidence. As long as Williams had Tom, he need not berate himself for living without a lover, and as long as Tom had Clive, he felt safe from any risk of a physical relationship. Between 1966 and 1973, Williams, buoyed up by friendship, would achieve the greater part of his most famous work. Round the Horn, broadcast as family listening at lunchtime on Sundays, acquired a reputation for looseness. Every catchphrase, even the most innocent and meaningless, sounded saucy. Williams was J. Peasmold Gruntfuttock, a heavy-breathing cockney who harboured lewd fantasies about women TV presenters and complained about the lack of explicit sex on the BBC. Dr. Chu N. Ginsberg, M.A., failed, the fiendish mastermind who plotted to blackmail world governments by firing nuclear fireworks out of giant milk bottles. Spasm, the butler, who felt a touch of the dooms coming on. Lecherous Arthur Fallowfield from beyond our ken was reborn as a richer, funnier character, one that Williams grew to love playing, the incomprehensibly obscene folk singer Ramblin' Sid Rumpo.
What shall we do with a drunken nurker? What shall we do with a drunken nurker? What shall we do with a drunken nurker? He's bending his cord wagon. Hit him in the nadgers with a bosun's plunger. Slap him on the grommet with a wrought iron lunger. Cuff him in the moolies with a captain's plunger. Till his bogles dangle.
Williams celebrated his 40th birthday at Pinewood with champagne and a cake, followed by dinner with Tom and Clive and Stanley Baxter. The next day he strolled through the St Pancras streets where he had grown up and thought old thoughts, but he was not alarmed at becoming middle-aged. His mother and his sister Pat, who had been sharing the Kensington flat, were driving him mad with their bickering. His solution was to give the property to his sister and to buy another apartment in a block opposite Great Portland Street tube station for Louis. He found his mother's helplessness exhausting. He could not leave her to do anything by herself, even to shop for furniture or book a workman to fix the sash windows. In June, he accepted an invitation from Eamon Andrews to be interviewed. His co-stars were Shirley Bassey and James Garner. When he walked onto the set, he was bubbling, witty, pithy, catty. He snatched up the audience and made them howl with laughter. Soon afterwards, the BBC head of light entertainment, Tom Sloane, rang to offer him the compere's role in a 7-week run of a BBC Two variety bill called International Cabaret. Williams accepted on the spot. "I think it's high time I had a shot at this kind of thing," he wrote. "Other idiots have been getting away with it for years." After only a week's brief preparation, the first night was chaos. The invited audience didn't know what to expect. The singers, dancers and jugglers on the bill didn't know what to do, and the monologues didn't work. Williams realised that this was not revue, and it was not acting. For the first time in his life, he was working as a stand-up comedian. His routine went over like a third-rate comic's patter on an end-of-the-pier bill at a wet Tuesday matinee. At the next show, the backstage chaos continued. Most of the acts were European, and the BBC had not provided interpreters, so that a cacophony of questions in Bulgarian and Italian were going unheeded. But Williams hit his pace from the start, playing much of his monologue to his sister Pat at a table close to the stage. Her booming laughter cued in the audience. Williams realised he could not be a stand-up comedian, but he could make the part work by acting it.